Well, I first ran across it when I started looking at the ancient Sanskrit literature of India, in particular the Puranas. The Puranas are the histories, and in those Puranas, I read accounts of human populations existing on this planet in very distant times, in some cases going back many millions of years. So I kind of thought, well, is that just some mythology that the authors of these texts invented hundreds or thousands of years ago? Or is there perhaps some factual basis for it? So that's what got me looking into the history of archaeology, because if you look in the current textbooks, you'll see a lot of discoveries, but they all fit the current paradigm that humans like us appeared on Earth fairly recently, within the past 200 or 300,000 years. And before that, they would say there weren't any human beings like us. There were only more primitive and ape like ancestral beings. So I thought, well, let me look beyond the textbooks. Let me look at the original scientific reports by archaeologists, geologists, others who are digging into the earth, and let me see what I find there. But what that evidence shows is that we need new explanations for human origins. And I think it goes beyond just matter. I mean, most scientists today would say, well, we're just machines made of molecules, purely material beings. As far as consciousness is concerned, well, that's just a temporary byproduct of bioelectrical activity in the brain. And at the time of death, when the chemicals in the brain become disorganized, no more consciousness, nothing like that. I don't accept that. I think there is a spiritual essence that you could say God has breathed in to the creatures. So when I look at the whole spectrum of uh, texts from different cultures, the one that I was most resonant with, or the text that was most resonant with me, was the Vedic text of ancient India, in particular Bhagavad Gita. But I don't claim to have a monopoly on truth. I think truth can be found in many different places. And it's like gold. You can take gold, you can form it into coins, and then you could stamp it with the symbols of different nations. But if it's really gold, it doesn't matter what symbol you've stamped on it. Apart from that, it's got its own value. So I tend to look at uh, the variety of spiritual texts in the same way. Yes, I've got my favorites, but I don't really accept that I have the exclusive truth and everybody else is wrong. Well, traditionally, the Mahabharata in its present form is said to have been composed by the sage Vyasadeva at the beginning of the Kali Yuga in terms of the Indian concept of cyclical time. So that would place it, according to tradition, about 5,000 years ago. But it would be based on traditions and sources that are even older. But the text of the Mahabharata, as we've got it now, according to the traditions, it'd be about 5,000 years. Modern scholarship puts it maybe around 1,000 years ago. If this evidence showing that humans have existed since the very beginning of life on Earth is taken seriously, what it indicates is that we're not accidental creatures in an accidental universe. The universe has a purpose, and that purpose, I believe, is to offer conscious selves, souls in the world of matter, the chance to qualify themselves to enter a level of reality that you could call heaven or the spiritual world, but I call it the level of pure consciousness. So that preparation, that qualification, it can be performed in the human bodily vehicle. A conscious self in a human bodily vehicle can understand these things and act upon them. So the way I look at it is the universe has a purpose. It's for self-realization and God realization. And that is accomplished in the human form of life. Another thing that I find interesting is the waking sleep cycle, that in a dream that we have at night, we may be acting in a different kind of body than we act in during our waking state. We may be acting in a body that has mystic powers, the ability to fly without any airplane or mechanical assistance. And, I wake up, I have a sense that I had a dream, but I can't remember it. But I'm certain that something was going on in another type of body than the one that I have in my waking state. So there's a whole level of experience that suggests that the conscious self can occupy different types of bodies.
Beyond the forbidden.
I have a old guest of mine. He's on my older radio show, Cryptic Knowledge Radio. But this is definitely a treat, honor, and privilege. I've been following Michael Cremo's work for a very long time, since I started going down rabbit holes in 2006. But Michael Cremo, welcome back to the show, man. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Good to be back with you again.
So right before I push record, we were talking about, or you mentioned a lady down here that was into the mounds and things in Louisiana.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, you had mentioned you're in Louisiana, and it just brought to mind a lady named Jean Hunt, who was president of an alternative archaeological organization called the Louisiana Mounds Society. So I guess there's some Native American Indian mounds in Louisiana, and she specialized in researching them. But it was interesting. She liked my work. She wrote a really nice review and endorsement of my book, Forbidden Archaeology. This was back in 1995 or 96 or so. And she called me on the phone, said, Michael, I have a friend of mine, Bill Coty. He's a producer of documentaries for NBC, and he's making one on human origins. And I think your book would be just perfect. Your work would be just perfect for his purposes. So I kind of followed up on that. I got in touch with Bill Coty and gave him a copy of Forbidden Archaeology. And he decided to include some of the cases from the book in the documentary, The Mysterious Origins of Man, that was broadcast on NBC. Of course, that was a different media era. At that time, the only videos that people could see, television they could see, was basically the three major networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, plus PBS a little bit. This is before the days of internet and streaming and all of that. But it was, you could say, the first national publicity that I really got. So I was really kind of grateful to Gene Hunt for making that happen.
And speaking of mounds, I really didn't. I had to pull this guy's name up because I forgot his name. I interviewed this guy. He's a professor in LSU, Louisiana State University. I interviewed him back in 2022. I remember his name being Brooks, but I forgot his last. His name is Brooks Elwood. He's a professor at LSU, and he, I believe, in the alternative type podcast scene like mine. I believe I'm one of the only few to actually to interview him. He's this one article, LSU's campus mounds found to be older than the pyramids, and he's behind that research. You could tell he's not real polished doing podcast, but he warmed up. But I think he said that those mounds on the campus are the oldest, I guess, ancient artifacts or whatever to be in North America, I believe is what he stated. But that's not why I'm bringing up his name. Well, because we were talking about mounds and things like that, and it made me think of him. But what he said reminds me of possibly you and your path of your research into the far ancient past, human civilization and all that. What he said later in the podcast, once you start warming up, is that I asked him, I'm paraphrasing, was 3 years ago. I didn't even know what I was going to bring him up during this podcast. He stated, or I asked him, how is your research? How are your peers that kind of have your same beliefs and theories, ideas, all that? He stated that it's so hard to get academic funding, and people are afraid. His peers, his colleagues are walking on pins and needles because they can't. I'm paraphrasing. They can't think outside the box because they may lose their funding. And that's kind of how, in a way, you as well. You've been battling the mainstream for a long time. How have you navigated through all that mess, that BS, Michael? And has it gotten better over the years since the beginning of your research, or is it still about the same?
Well, it's kind of important to understand that there are different kinds of scientists. They're not all in the same box, you could say. Basically, I found three reactions from the academic and scientific community to my work. One group I call the fundamentalist materialists, and they accept the current theories of human origins and evolution for more or less ideological reasons, not purely scientific reasons. They have a very strict commitment to materialism and, in some cases, atheism, but not necessarily all the time. And they don't like to hear what I'm saying. They don't want anyone else to hear it. They're the types that would, if they learned I was giving a lecture at their university, they would try to get it banned or stopped in some way or another. Or, that's one category of scientists and researchers in the field of human origins. Then there's another type that's a little more open-minded. They're not necessarily my supporters, in most cases not, but they support the current dominant paradigm, but for more or less scientific reasons, not as an ideological commitment. That means they're ready to listen to alternatives if they're presented in terms of being backed up by good evidence. They're well documented. The reasoning seems uh, good to them, and it's scientists in that group who have approved proposals for papers that I presented at mainstream archaeology conferences. Some of those papers have actually been published in their peer-reviewed scientific journals and books. And they'll sometimes invite me to speak at their universities because they're willing to listen to alternatives. And I think that's an important first step, because if ideas are going to change, as I think they should, and they inevitably will, the first thing is somebody's got to be willing to listen. And in their reviews of my work, say their reviews of my book, Forbidden Archaeology, they acknowledge positive aspects of it, whereas those from the first group, normally they don't publish their reviews of my work in their professional scientific literature. They tend to publish it in interest group types of publications, skeptic societies, and things like that. But in the second group of academics, archaeologists, they are willing to acknowledge positive aspects of my work. For example, there was a famous, well-known historian of science, David Oldroyd. He and a co-author wrote a 23-page review article about my book, Forbidden Archaeology, in an academic journal called Social Studies of Science. And they asked the question, does forbidden archaeology make a contribution to the literature on paleoanthropology? Paleoanthropology is the discipline that deals with human origins. And they said, yes, this book does make a contribution for two reasons. First of all, the authors said, as professional historians of science, dealing particularly with archaeology, we can say that no one has gone into the history of archaeology in such depth before. And second, they said the book raises important questions about the nature of scientific truth claims. In other words, scientists attach different levels of certainty to their theories. Their theory of human evolution, they attach a level of certainty that approaches 100% certain, no doubts about it. But these authors said in their review of Forbidden Archaeology, well, maybe they should bring it down a notch, in light of the evidence that's presented in this book. Maybe they ought to take it down a notch in terms of how certain they are about the absolute truth of that theory. So uh, I did find that among that group, there were some who were willing to acknowledge positive aspects to my work. Now, among that group, there are some that would actually agree with me, not only say, well, this has a right to be heard, we should listen to it, we should make our decisions about it, but there have been a few who have actually agreed with me. Now sometimes that has caused them problems, as you say, in funding or applying for an academic position. there is a process of knowledge filtration that operates in the world of science, including archaeology. And there are pressures that can be applied that tend to keep people in line in the box, so to speak.
And with your research, the forbidden archaeology, and that was, I could credit you were one of the people that with the word forbidden, even though that's not, I know that's not your coined word, but I was thinking, how can I reshape this podcast? It used to be Cryptic Knowledge Radio, 2010, for a couple there for a couple of years. It's like forbidden. I got to do something forbidden and that's like beyond the forbidden. I want to go beyond what's hidden, what's kept from us. I want to explore the depths of everything, all the mysteries of the universe, the mysteries of mankind, and even in the conspiratorial sense, things that are kept from us, either advanced technologies or cover-ups of within the political scheme, academic scheme, technological scheme. But I was just looking at one of your books there, and that was one of my first books, The Hidden History of the Human Race. That was one of the first books that I bought. And I also have a book by Richard L. Thompson, one of your
Oh,
colleagues. Alien Identities is the name. I think he renamed it, or it was renamed or something like that. But that's a very good book. Did you help Richard Thompson with that book any?
well, yes, I did. We had many discussions about it. And I think in the introduction and the acknowledgments, he lists me as one of the people who contributed to his understanding on those questions. Uh, the name of the book, I actually gave him the title of the book, Alien Identities.
Did it change, Michael? Did it change to another
It
name?
did. He originally had the idea of calling it Parallels,
Mm-hmm.
which is a reference to the parallels between modern UFO accounts and accounts of similar phenomenon given in the ancient wisdom traditions, like the spiritual tradition of ancient India, which describes craft called vimanas that tend to uh, exhibit flight patterns and other aspects that resemble what we get from modern UFO types of reports, like the ability to move in very unusual ways that violate the principles of aerodynamics. So yeah.
Um, so my wife, speaking of the Vedics and the Vedic text and ancient Sanskrit text, my wife, she lets me do my thing with this research, my podcast and all that, But we started late. We have a 2.5 year old, should be 3 November. We had to do IVF in vitro. Um, and she's like, "What do you want?" We're trying to think of a name for the baby, right? And like I said, she doesn't do this research like me, and she says she loves Veda, but it's VADA, Victor Alpha Delta Alpha. And I was like, that's it. I said, what made you want to pick Veda? And she said, because of My Girl, it was a movie from the 90s. She used to love that movie when she was a kid. And I was like, there we go. Veda, but we're going to spell it a little different, VADA, but
Well, VADA also has a meaning. It means a philosophical conclusion. Uh, so if somebody is uh, a vada of something, like Mayavada,
Mhm.
means those who reach the conclusion that everything is this illusory energy, Maya. So, there can be, or Tattvavada means supporters of the idea that there is an absolute truth. So there's a lot of different Vedas. Of course, you're pronouncing it with a long
Veda, a with the
Veda.
A. Yeah.
But Veda itself would mean, phonetically, as you're pronouncing it, knowledge in Sanskrit.
So is a
So,
pretty good name that you picked.
oh yeah, perfect.
So let's get into a little bit of the meat and taters of this. So
There's one thing I like to mention based
go
on
ahead.
what you were just saying. You were talking about how you got the name Forbidden, from my work.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to me how the term forbidden archaeology has become, in the alternative science world, a kind of generic term. Like you used to have, a particular product, copying machines made by a certain company, Xerox, and then any copy by any type of machine became known as a Xerox. Maybe there's more contemporary examples of that. That's one that comes to mind. So, yeah, there are forbidden archaeology conferences, seminars, things like that. It's interesting.
It is. Do and I know, man, that I remember when I first came across you, I want to say it was on Coast to Coast, probably.
Probably.
And
No,
I remember you saying, I don't actually remember if it was with Art Bell, which, I went down a rabbit hole in '06, but, Art Bell, he did come in and every now and then to do shows. George Norrie was the full-time host, but I remember you stating that human, the human beings have possibly been around for possibly for millions of years. And I was like, whoa, who is this guy? Where's his books? Let me get some of these books, And see, I was also open minded that you didn't, yes, you blew my mind, with your research and the interviews I've listened to on Coast to Coast and other platforms, but I was open minded that I'm ready to tackle this subject. I wasn't intimidated. I wasn't about to name call all this Michael Cremo. Who is this guy? And so many people are quick to name bash without actually looking at the evidence or somebody's thesis and trying to make sense of it. But where did you? Of course, I know all about you, Michael. You've been around this field for a while, but you're always going to have these newcomers like I was back in the day in '06. So where did you come across the information uh, that led you to believe that the human race has been here for much longer than modern quackademia has put on the table for us?
well, I first ran across it when I started looking at the ancient Sanskrit literature of India, in particular the Puranas. The Puranas are the histories. And in those Puranas, I read accounts of human populations existing on this planet in very distant times, in some cases going back many millions of years. So I kind of thought, well, is that just some mythology that the authors of these texts invented hundreds or thousands of years ago? Or is there perhaps some factual basis for it? So that's what got me looking into the history of archaeology. Because if you look in the current textbooks, you'll see a lot of discoveries, but they all fit the current paradigm that humans like us appeared on Earth fairly recently, within the past 200,000 or 300,000 years. And before that, they would say there weren't any human beings like us. There were only more primitive and ape like ancestral beings. So I thought, well, let me look beyond the textbooks. Let me look at the original scientific reports by archaeologists, geologists, others who are digging into the earth, and let me see what I find there. So I started looking into it, and I found a few cases, and I thought, well, that might be just it. And I'll write a little short article about it and go on to some other topic of interest to me. But I noticed in these reports that I found that they had little footnotes in them. And similar discoveries were made by such and such scientists in Europe in the 1880s, or you see another footnote in another paper. Yes, and similar discoveries were made by this scientist in France. And then I would track those down, and they would give me leads to other reports. And so my initial 8 days of research turned into 8 weeks, 8 months, 8 years total research. And I was just amazed that there were so many cases of human bones, human artifacts, human footprints going much further back in time than the current dominant theories allow.
About
So
what year was this, Michael, when you went beyond the forbidden?
uh, I started this research around 1984. Forbidden Archaeology was published in 1993. And from that time on, it's become kind of a career for me.
So one thing, when you study and analyze a lot of these ancient texts, you see a lot of similarities, with how with different cultures all over the world, with that they kind of mesh together. They may have similarities and oddities, but in a way they all kind of fit together. Um, but one culture may say something a little bit differently, but it's kind of on the same path, you know. Um, like, let me see if I can pull this up real quick. And of course we know that the Christian Bible and Corinthians, chapter 15, verse 45 through 49. This is the New King James Version, quote. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being, the last Adam, life giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural, there. And after that, the spiritual. The first man was of the dust of the earth. The second man is of heaven, as was the earthly man. So are those of who are of the earth, and is the heavenly man. But and also you can look at the similarities between that passage from Corinthians and the Mayan Popol Vuh quote. Let us try again. Already dawn draws near. Let us make him who shall nourish and sustain us. What shall we do to be invoked in order to be remembered on earth? We have already tried with our first creations, our first creatures, but we could not make them praise and venerate us. So then let us try to make obedient, respectful beings who will nourish and sustain us. End quote. Those two passages are so close, because if you look in Corinthians, it said the spiritual did not come first. So you could look at, I don't know, this is your forte, but the Neanderthals, or even possibly millions of years ago, the natural beings here on Earth, maybe a product of evolution, I don't know. And then maybe later on, we're still in the Bible quote. Maybe that's when God or whoever came in and intervened to give the last Adam a life-giving spirit, to give that spiritual essence, that soul, that life-giving spirit, or whatever. And then you go like to the Popol Vuh. Let us try again. Let us try again. Or let us make him who shall nourish and sustain us. You know, um, we have already tried with our first creations, our first creatures, but what could we not make them praise and venerate us? So then let us make obedient, respectful beings who will nourish and sustain us. That's just two. These ancient, through studying your research over the years and others too, these are just two passages from one from the Bible, one from Popol Vuh. You can look at the ancient Sanskrit text, and they all kind of mesh together to make one good, beautiful picture of our ancient past in one way or another, Michael.
Yeah, I think that's a very important observation. Yeah, my book, Forbidden Archaeology, was just about stones and bones. But what that evidence shows is that we need new explanations for human origins. And I think it goes beyond just matter. I mean, most scientists today would say, well, we're just machines made of molecules, purely material beings. As far as consciousness is concerned, well, that's just a temporary byproduct of bioelectrical activity in the brain. And at the time of death, when the chemicals in the brain become disorganized, no more consciousness, nothing like that. I don't accept that. I think there is a spiritual essence that you could say God has breathed in to the creatures. Now, uh, I noticed the same thing that you noticed is that these accounts of the different cosmologies of different cultures and peoples down through time and through all places all over the world tend to converge on some kind of common truths. And I explored these concepts in a book that I wrote called Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory. One chapter of that book is called The Cross-Cultural Study of Cosmologies. And there I made the same observation that you made. I looked at 40 different cultures spread widely across time and space. And they all tended to converge on similar truths that there is a spiritual essence, that there, the human race has been around since the beginning. We're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. There are these common features, and as you mentioned, they may seem a little bit different, but the example that I use is like if you're looking at a mountain from different directions, somebody's looking from the east, somebody's looking from the west, somebody from the south, somebody from the north. Their descriptions are going to be a little bit different because they've each got their own angle of or perspective on it. But it's also obvious that they're talking about the same object. So that's something I noticed as well.
So,
Oh, and just one more detail.
go ahead, Michael.
My work got a very good response from uh, the Creation Research Society, which is an organization of Christian scholars who look at this whole question of the origin of life, the origin of the universe, and conclude there's something more involved than just random interactions of material elements. So, with some of them, I mean, even though we may differ about the age of the Earth, you know, I found that some of the researchers in that area like what I do because there's more we agree about than disagree.
Out of all the ancient texts, which one do you lean towards the most, Michael?
Well, this is like,
I know you have to look at all of them,
yeah,
with an unbiased
but
opinion and approach it with a scientific manner, and also,
but but I will give an honest answer. I won't avoid the question. But it's kind of like, if people want to buy a mobile phone. I mean, there's so many brands, so many companies offering so many, and each one saying it's the best. But eventually, you have to make a choice which one is best for you in terms of what you want to do, what you're prepared to pay, so on and so forth. So when I look at the whole spectrum of uh, texts from different cultures, the one that I was most resonant with, or the text that was most resonant with me, was the Vedic text of ancient India, in particular Bhagavad Gita. But I don't claim to have a monopoly on truth. I think truth can be found in many different places. And it's like gold. You can take gold, you can form it into coins, and then you could stamp it with the symbols of different nations. But if it's really gold, it doesn't matter what symbol you've stamped on it. Apart from that, it's got its own value. So I tend to look at uh, the variety of spiritual texts in the same way. Yes, I've got my favorites, but I don't really accept that I have the exclusive truth and everybody else is wrong.
out of the ancient Sanskrit text, whatever, I think one thing I've heard over, well, really since I've been doing research and podcasts, is you'll hear some in the community will say that the Mahabharata was not of actual events, is more of like a fables and things like that. I tend to differ. I think maybe it was written in a way just like things within the Bible also. Jonah and the whale, could that had been like a story or something to represent something else different? It was more, was it really a man in the belly of a whale? You know what I mean? It could have been a representation of something much more deeper, complex. Who knows? That's the way a lot of people aren't looking and having an open-minded approach to some of these ancient texts. But what's your thoughts on the Mahabharata? Do you? I'm assuming you tend to agree with what's actually said in the text, also, Michael.
Uh, Basically, yes. I mean, there's when you really get into analyzing texts, whether it's the Bible or the Buddhist texts or others, you can point out different manuscripts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, uh, this manuscript and that manuscript, and you can find some points to debate about. What was originally there, what was added, what was taken out. You can do that, but basically, whether it's the Bible, I would say, yeah, well, the Bible is there, its basic message. I I accept. Now, like I said, if you were a college professor of linguistics and textual interpretation, well, you could get down into the weeds about this word or that word. So, yeah. So, but basically, I accept the basic information that's given in the Mahabharata, which has some interesting things in it, descriptions of ancient wars that involved the use of weapons called brahmastras, which resemble modern nuclear weapons and their effects, descriptions of vimanas or aircraft and spacecraft, uh, descriptions of
And then
mis-
people burning and going to the river or to the water to try to escape the heat, I believe is, I don't have the text in front of me, but the description, man, it's, how do they know this?
yeah.
What's the date to the best of your opinion? You can't always go by mainstream academic, points of view, but what's the date in your opinion of this text?
Well, traditionally, the Mahabharata in its present form is said to have been composed by the sage Vyasadeva at the beginning of the Kali Yuga in terms of the Indian concept of cyclical time. So that would place it, according to tradition, about 5,000 years ago. But it would be based on traditions and sources that are even older. But the text of the Mahabharata, as we've got it now, according to the traditions, it'd be about 5,000 years. Modern scholarship puts it maybe around 1,000 years ago. But yeah, that's kind of constantly changing. So,
So what happened if the human race is much older than what we're led to believe, in the modern academic point of view, I guess. And I guess just regular people, most people think that human race is only 8,000 years old, or the extreme case, like people in the alternative movement, a couple 100,000 years old. But if the human race goes back possibly millions of years, is it the reason why it's hard for modern academic or academia to grasp that notion is because things get buried, and instead of, you know in the earth, they get destroyed. An iPhone isn't going to last 100. It'll be decayed in 100 years, or a couple 100 years. It'll be basically dust in a couple 100 years. Um and then I, is that the case with that, on top of how you talked about in devolution, I believe, how we go through these cyclic patterns throughout history, if I remember correctly. Is that how we have come and gone throughout time, possibly millions of years ago? Like, do you think a lot of this is from natural cycles of time through natural resets, like of storms or meteors or comets or floods or whatever it is, ice age, or even possibly like in the Mahabharata, like ancient wars? You know, is that how a lot of this, our true origins have been lost to from the ancient past, the far distant past, is because of these cyclic patterns that we have gone through over the centuries or the millennia? Michael, I guess explain a little bit better than I did.
well, you've mentioned some very important things. The cyclical nature of time, the idea that there are periodic catastrophes that wipe out civilization or different life forms on this planet. Of course, that's part of even conventional science. If
But theirs only
you
goes mostly back to 10 or 12,000 years ago. Mostly, it seems like,
uh,
right? Or am I wrong with that?
what they say about periodic catastrophes is, according to the current theories, life began on Earth a couple of billion years ago. The Earth, they think, is maybe 4 billion years old, 4 or 5 billion years old. Life began about 2 billion years ago, they say. And since that time, there have been 6 major extinction events that have almost wiped out life on Earth, practically speaking. The last such catastrophic event was about 65 million years ago, according to their understanding, at which time some asteroid struck the Earth and resulted in the extinction of the dinosaurs. So the ancient Sanskrit writings, in their concept of cyclical time, also inform us that there have been periodic catastrophic events that have depopulated the earth. So now this gets back to the nature of a human being. Today, most scientists would say we're purely material beings. We're machines made of matter, and that's what we are. But I think there's more to a human being than that. There is a conscious self that can exist apart from the body made of matter, apart from the brain. And there's scientific evidence for that in the form of past life memories, out of body experiences that people have, uh, including when they're, say, undergoing cardiac arrest in a hospital situation and their brain waves flatten, the heartbeat disappears, blood stops flowing to the brain. They should be completely unconscious. Yet many people in that condition report separating from their bodies, looking down, they can see what the doctors and nurses are doing to revive them. And the descriptions that they give match the actual medical records kept by the doctors who treated them in those circumstances. So there's a lot of evidence that our real identity is a being of pure consciousness or spirit. Or to use a religious term, there's a soul that survives the death of the body made of matter. Now, if that means that there could be, and I think there are, higher levels of reality where there are beings who have the resources and capability of rebooting life on Earth. It's just like if you have uh, a mobile phone and you've got everything backed up, all your pictures and music and documents backed up on the cloud, so to speak. That means if you lose or destroy your device, everything needed to restore it is in the cloud. You just get your new device and download everything, and you're back in business. So I think our cosmos is like that. On the level of reality that we exist upon, there are these periodic catastrophes that take place, but there are resources from higher levels of the cosmos that can be used to reboot life on Earth. Now, that gets you back to this question of extreme human antiquity, which, by the way, is the name of my latest book, Extreme Human Antiquity. It came out a couple of months ago. But if this evidence showing that humans have existed since the very beginning of life on Earth is taken seriously, what it indicates is that we're not accidental creatures in an accidental universe. The universe has a purpose. And that purpose, I believe, is to offer conscious souls in the world of matter, the chance to qualify themselves to enter a level of reality that you could call heaven or the spiritual world, but I call it the level of pure consciousness. So that preparation, that qualification, it can be performed in the human bodily vehicle. A conscious self in a human bodily vehicle can understand these things and act upon them. So the way I look at it is the universe has a purpose. It's for self-realization and God realization. And that is accomplished in the human form of life. Say we don't see the cats and the dogs and the fish listening to this podcast to learn about their real natures. So it's not that it's unimportant, but they just don't have that capability. So it makes sense to me, therefore, that the human bodily vehicle should always have been available for conscious selves or souls to use for that higher purpose. So it's like if we build a space station, we send, the parts up into the sky, into space, in Earth orbit, and they come together into a space station. We don't do that hoping that the gases inside the space station will spontaneously combine into some first living thing, which will develop into astronauts at some point. No, we send the space station up because we have astronauts that are going to use it. So I kind of look at our cosmos, our universe, as a kind of space station that has been launched by God for the purpose of giving conscious selves, souls, the opportunity in a human bodily vehicle to come to a true understanding of their real nature and qualify themselves to enter the level of reality where they really belong, not on this level where everything is temporary, subject to destruction, and so many unpleasant things that happen in the world of matter.
And I've watched some of your. I was saving towards the end of the show where we are now to cover some of the your material. That you cover in Extreme Human Antiquity, and that I've heard on some of your other podcasts with Jimmy Church also. Talking about reincarnation but when I listen to that some of your other podcasts that you've done this year with your newest book out or radio shows or whatever, you know what dawned or what first went in my mind? The movie with the Tom Hanks movie Cloud Atlas. Have you seen that movie?
Um, I
It's
don't
I think it
recall.
came out. I think it came out in 2012. Here is a Google description of the movie. The core thesis of Cloud Atlas revolves around the interconnectedness of humanity across time, space, and different lives, suggesting that individual actions and choices have far-reaching consequences and that patterns of power, oppression, and resistance recur throughout history. It explores themes of freedom, interdependence, and the cyclical nature of human experience, highlighting uh, how these narratives are linked by recurring motifs and sharing struggles. And also it goes into reincarnation within this big throughout. And within the movie, they go. I think it's been a while since I've seen it, but it starts off back in. Let me see if I see it here. If I can find the. I think it starts back. It starts in the future. The movie does,
Mm,
and I thought I had it pulled up here. Here it goes. I think it starts in the year I could have it reversed, but I think it starts. I need to rewatch the movie in the year 2321, and then it
Mm.
goes instead of, and it goes back in time, and they die and they reincarnate into the year 2144. They die, reincarnate, and they're and these it's a couple. Tom Hanks is the main character, and then they pop up in 2012, and then they pop up in 1973, and then they pop up in 1936, and then 1849, I believe. I believe that's how. I think it started in the future and then went back, I believe.
Mm.
It's man, it made me,
Oh,
when hearing you talk about this current research and then on the other shows you've done this year, I was like, man, I need to rewatch Cloud Atlas. You know, like they're trying to tell us possibly a little bit of truth in some of these what they label as science fiction.
well, I've got Amazon Prime, so I can, if it's on there,
It
I'll have
should be. It came out. I think it came out 2012. But yeah, it um. Do you
I'll
think
I'll have a look at it. Maybe I have seen it, but it doesn't come immediately back into my mind.
it's very deep? I remember being a very deep and it's very long. I want to say it's between 2 and 3 hours long. It's a very deep and sophisticated movie. Um, but I guess with the notion of reincarnation, I've kind of bounced back and forth like a yo-yo. I think it's possible. I never say for a fact of what I think. I don't like to say I believe because I could be wrong. So I never said that reincarnation never won't exist or it won't happen or nothing like that. But I have bounced back and forth over the years of doing research, of leaning one side of the fence or the other. But more lately, the past several years, I come, just going deeper down that rabbit hole that it's a very well possibility that it is probably happening, but the thing is it's hard to know for sure. Like, how do we have truth or some kind of substance to a tangible something to prove it? You know what I mean? Because I know if life is a test, it's not a test. We have all the answers, if we keep coming back. And that's kind of how the movie Cloud Atlas was, they knew something was off, but is it like that movie was, it like a test, but they didn't have the answers. It would defeat the purpose if it was a test. What's your view on reincarnation a little bit further in detail, Michael? And what makes you think, or pulling up maybe ancient texts and things like that, and maybe just your own gut speculation, what makes you think it's more of a possibility than more just conjecture and just theory?
Well, there are a few things that are practically daily experiences, that I can see that in my lifetime, my conscious self has had different embodiments. Like right now, I have a bodily vehicle that is getting a little bit older. But I can remember when I was 2 years old and I was in a baby's body or an infant's body. I can remember when I was 8 years old. I've gone through reincarnations even in this one lifetime that I've experienced. Another thing that I find interesting is the waking sleep cycle that in a, a dream that we have in at night, we may be acting in a different kind of body than we act in during our waking state. We may be acting in a body that has mystic powers, the ability to fly without any airplane or mechanical assistance. And, I wake up, I have a sense that I had a dream, but I can't remember it. But I'm certain that something was going on in another type of body than the one that I have in my waking state. So there's a whole level of experience that suggests that the conscious self can occupy different types of bodies. Uh, so then I add to that experiences that I've had that come under the heading of deja vu. Uh, that you have you visit a place you supposedly have never seen before or in this life, but you have a strong feeling that yes, I've been here before. This is very familiar.
It's
And
bone chilling. Like when you have those experiences, it's very bone. You feel it. You feel it deep in your gut. Like something is off here, Michael. You know what I mean? Like it's not just I'm not losing my mind here. Something. It's almost like a glitch in the matrix or something. You know.
yeah, something like that. So there's a whole set of experiences that I have. I started out with the most common ones that most people will share. Being in a particular state of the body right now and being able to remember being in a body that was in a different state from the one that we have at the present moment. And then the waking dreaming state, the dream bodies. And then a little less common sense of deja vu. And I'm here talking about first person things. There's a variety of third person kinds of observations, scientific experiments about past life memories, verifying them, and things like that. There's all that kind of information. But I think you were asking more about personal experiences that one might have that might incline one to accept the idea that this my conscious self could have been present in another body. Yeah, my mother used to tell me when I was very young, like 3 years old, 4 years old, that she would give me alphabet soup to eat, but I wouldn't eat it. I would spell out words in the bowl, using the noodles that were shaped like the letters of the alphabet. So sometimes if one has a particular talent or ability and you wonder where that came from, well, it may be something that I took up in a past life and now I'm continuing with it. You know, I have a strong sensation like that. Sometimes children display unusual musical abilities or something like that. They never had a piano lesson, but they sit down at a piano and all of a sudden they're playing classical music or jazz or rock and roll. Like just wonder where does that come from? Where does that ability come from? Or sometimes there's mathematical ability, kids that can solve really advanced equations. And you wonder where did that come from? It the idea of a past life begins to seem not only possible but probable. So it's those kinds of things. Or, I mean, one thing that happened to me, I would, I give a lot of lectures all over the world about my work, which is, in one sense, anti evolutionary, anti Darwinian. So, at one lecture I was giving in one country, a person kind of came up to me after the talk and said, uh, maybe Mr. Cremo or maybe Michael, you're a reincarnation of Charles Darwin. And that's why you have to go all around the world giving these talks to correct your mistake.
Hmm.
And I kind of laughed about it, but then I started thinking, after some time, well, maybe there's something to that. But um, yeah, so those are the kinds of considerations that I personally use in evaluating the concept of reincarnation. Um, and as I said, in addition to that, there's all the scientific research that I documented in books like Human Devolution.
One of the wildest claims that I've heard, and I don't even think it's not even a theory. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to have to paraphrase this. It actually happened according to what I remember. It was so years ago. It was a woman. Her husband died. I don't want to say it was in Florida. Her husband died, and it was time passed on just a little bit. I don't remember how long. I don't have, like I said, those notes in front of me, but he he came back, or this boy, he grew up in this household. I guess he was born and he grew up in this household, and he kept on telling his parents, I need to go to Florida. I got to go find Jane Smith, whatever her name was, whatever this woman's name is, I think she lives in Florida or whatever. He kept on saying this name at a very, very young age. And long story short, his parents brought him to see this woman in Florida and said, I'm so and so, I'm your late husband or whatever. And the woman was saying, like, she was thinking this was crazy, right? And the little boy said, where's my watch at? Where's my watch?
Yeah,
It's locked up in the safe. The boy went to the safe and unlocked it using the password, the digit code. How remarkable is that?
yeah.
And you hear these stories all the time, and then kind of, I don't know how I, if it has anything to do with reincarnation or maybe something similar, but with my ex girlfriend many years ago, early 20s, um, we she told me, I'm trying to remember, I never wrote it down, but I think I told her my dream first. I was running through a desert and I was being chased by somebody through a desert, but I had this other person with me, and I think at the time, I think it was a female, but I couldn't tell who it was, right? And somebody's chasing us, I think trying to kill us or whatever. And I hid in this house and with this other person, I believe it was a female. And then we went outside and hid under a truck, me and this other person. We're trying to hide from this person trying to kill us. And that's a long story short. That's really all I can remember, Michael. And then she's like, oh my God. She's like, I had the same exact dream. But in her dream, she was running through the desert. She had this other person with her. She couldn't tell who it was. She thought it was a man. It was kind of like blurry. She couldn't tell who or what it was. Same exact thing that I just told you. And it ended with her underneath the vehicle, hiding from person tracking her down, trying to kill her, you know.
Well,
And man, it still gives me chills to the day even think of it, because she she was a straightforward person. She wasn't lying, and she was dead serious. And she almost like she just kind of saw a ghost when I told her my dream first. She, like, just pale almost, you know. Um, you ever hear things like that, or you ever had similar situations, Michael?
Um, yeah, sort of. I mean, what would make it? I mean, I have no doubt what you're saying, but to make it more credible for somebody who might be a little bit skeptical, it would have been good somehow if you had both been keeping dream diaries or records and
Yeah.
separately wrote it down.
Early 20s, kind of
Yeah. But
we're not thinking
I
about
have
that.
I don't doubt the story at all. And I mean, my question would be, are you supposing that the person you were with and the person that she was with were each other?
That's what else could it be? Because we had the same exact dream running through the desert, hiding from this person trying to kill us. We went through a house and then eventually up underneath a vehicle and hid out. But we didn't.
Well,
But on my side, I didn't know who exactly that person was, and on her side, she didn't know exactly who the person was she was with either. You
you
know,
didn't, you also don't know who was trying to kill you.
no, no. It almost makes you wonder: is that a possible past life thing? I don't know.
Yeah.
But before we end the discussion for this time, Michael, you said something a while ago with we've had 6 major extinction level events, you know, in recorded history. Do you think that we are possibly on the verge or due in a cyclical nature or whatever for a 7th mass extinction event?
Well, it's interesting. I got that question in the year 2012 when there was this whole thing about the Mayan calendar and a devastation taking place. And, I do lecture tours in different countries. So in that particular year, in the fall of 2012, I was giving lectures at universities in India. And in the theaters in India, they were showing this Hollywood movie, 2012, which, the movie posters showed like a monk up in the Himalayan mountains, really high in the Himalayas, seeing this huge tidal wave coming, that was going to wash over the Himalayas. So a lot of the students had seen that. So during the question session, I was talking about forbidden archaeology and human devolution, my usual topics, but a question came up. Do you think there's going to be a devastation on that level? A catastrophic planet busting devastation in December of 2012. Now, what I said was that the devastation is going to come, but according to the Puranas, it's going to be in about 120 million years from now. So I told the kids, you can register for next semester's classes, because isn't going to happen. It's interesting, the modern scientific account says over the past 2 billion years, there have been 6 major extinction events. But like I said, the last one being the one that wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. According to the Vedic cosmology, the last creation event where our Earth and solar system and universe were created was about 2 billion years ago. And since then, there have been like that cycle, which is called the Kalpa or Day of Brahma, lasts about 4 billion years. It began 2 billion years ago. And the Day of Brahma is divided into 14 manvantars. We're now in the 7th. And between each Manvantar, there is a devastation. So there have been 6 devastations in the last 2 billion years, which kind of lines up with what modern geology and paleontology say. And they occur at intervals of about 300 million years, roughly. And the current Manvantar is about 120 million years into it. So there's about 180 million years left to go until the next big devastation. So I kind of, as I said to the students, no, I don't think there's going to be a devastation in December of 2012, but it is coming, but it's a long time from now. But that same year after I left India, I went on, I was a speaker on a cruise ship that was taking a group of people to Chichen Itza in Mexico, which is one of the big Mayan sites. So we were on a cruise at the end of December when the devastation was supposed to take place, but it didn't happen. You know, but it was really interesting to go to Chichen Itza, where they have this pyramid-like object that's very similar to structures that you see in South India in terms of the elaborate carvings and solar significance. You know, it's pretty interesting. We talked to some Mayan elders there about the Mayan calendar and the cycles of time according to that calendar. And the Mayan elders also mentioned reincarnation, that the fact that I was there and some other people were there was because of contact with that culture in a previous life. So, kind of interesting how these things come up.
Very interesting. Well, Michael Cremo, I appreciate you coming on Beyond Forbidden for this time. Maybe we can dive more into it next time. I'll get the links for everybody to check out in the description and then also within the video. But Michael Cremo, thank you very much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Okay, and if you could put a link to the website, extremehumanantiquity.com, so people can have a look at the new book, I'd appreciate that as well.